Hello students, this is Mr. Bose. Today I'll be interviewing Professor Patrick LeBeau from Michigan State University. Thank you for taking the time today, Professor, to talk about these important issues in history. First question. Just like any other race, I realize the history of Native Americans is vast and quite difficult to summarize. But if you were to condense your historical interpretation, what important aspects would you like students to know about or understand better?
Well, for me, I have four main areas that I like to cover in American Indian history. First of all, race is a real hard, I guess a misnomer is applied to American Indians simply because there's a political aspect to American Indian identity, a legal aspect to it that no other minorities or racial groups have, and that is a relationship with the federal government. We have reservations, and I think that's one of the most important things that people need to know, and that reservations are linked to Indian treaties, and treaties are agreements between two sovereigns. And the sovereigns here would be the federal government or a United States government, or when with an individual Indian tribe. Like my father's tribe are called the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, and they have a series of treaties with the federal government. That kind of relationship makes our place in America much different than, let's say, African Americans or Jewish Americans or any other minority group, because we have governments and we have a sort of political identity. Other parts of I guess of history that I'd like students to always be aware of is the power and influence of stereotypes of American Indians. And stereotypes of American Indians are numerous. There's many examples that you can find out there in the world today that stereotype Indians. And most of the stereotypes are of profiles of American Indian warriors. So you'll see them dressed in war bonnets and feathered headdresses, dressed in warrior clothing, and holding war weapons. And that distorts and simplifies an image of an Indian that most students have. And what I like to tell students is that Indians are very complicated and hard to understand. They're not easy to understand, and so it takes quite a long time to really even understand one tribe. But a good place to start is with stereotypes, because then we can sort them out from what we see as real Indians and from what we know about as stereotypical representations. But as you mentioned, it's a vast and complicated history. So one good way is to look for Indians in the local community and invite them and have them come and talk about their particular place in that community, instead of looking far away. Oftentimes you'll read about Pueblo Indians or Sioux Indians, and if you live in Michigan, then you should be looking for those Indians that are close by and learn about them, because then you can actually visit the places, or maybe you live in a place that has a lot of historical significance.
The issue of power and how certain groups of people and races have either dominated or attempted to control other groups of individuals in history, and still today, is quite prevalent. Professor LeBeau, in the context of power, could you please discuss the quotation, "Might is right," and how it applies to Native Americans?
Might is right comes out of the T.S. White's Camelot stories about King Arthur and his knights. And might means that if you have the power to dominate another group, that's might. You can force your will upon other people. And a concept of might is right, meaning that if you can do that, then whatever you do is considered right. But in retrospect, if you take a look at it in a larger context, might is not necessarily right. It could be just a form of justification, moral and ethical justification, to do your will over another group of people and call it right. In terms of American Indians, this is quite often the case, where even though there are treaty rights and treaties and agreements between two sovereign nations, sometimes the the one sovereign that is more powerful than the other will dictate the terms of those treaties. In other words, forcing land away from American Indians through the treaty usually can only be done with might. And because you have might, then it's right in your own mind. But a lot of historians nowadays sort of criticize and take a critical approach to that issue of right and wanted to, I guess, correct history and also to seek justice for American Indians where wrongs were clearly done, and that might is right is sort of an unethical and untenable position to take. And so historians and lawmakers need to consider whether the treaties or the power that the federal government has over American Indians is just in every case. American Indians, of course, have always been seen as the weaker power in a relationship between even states or local people. That's changing now because of reinterpretation of the whole issue of might is right. It's sort of changing to what is ethical, what is moral, how should you interpret these things so that it can be fair to all parties involved, not just the one that's the most dominant. But might is right is a good way to explain what has happened to American Indians, especially on Indian reservations.
The oppression of Native Americans throughout history and still today is well documented, but tragically often ignored. With Native Americans living and thriving today in 2009, why are Indians misrepresented, stereotyped, and characterized oftentimes in the form of mascots for sports teams and educational institutions?
My belief is that the stereotypes originate out of a sense of American national identity rather than about American Indians themselves. Early on in American history, the founding fathers, like Benjamin Franklin, among others, Samuel Adams, and so forth, created an association with an American Indian to separate symbolically their identity as Americans from their English identity. Instead of calling themselves Englishmen, they began calling themselves Americans. The first word used to describe Indians was Americans. So when you said American, you meant Indian. But soon the founding fathers started to use Indians like Yankees or American to say that we're different as a nation, and to start thinking of American national identity as opposed to a European English identity. And they knew the difference between what they were inventing and real Indians, because they were fighting real Indians on the frontier. I mean, at that time, Indians could be a threat; they could kill you. But a person dressing up like an Indian or associating Indian paraphernalia, like dressing up in Indian garb, for instance, like a Halloween Indian style costume. People knew the difference between that kind of portrayal and Indians on the frontier. The problem in modern times, in 2009, is that people don't know the difference between the invented Indian and the real Indian. So they apply what they've learned about the invented Indian to real Indians, and they don't match up. So the way we imagine Indians, and let's say buckskins and having living in teepees or something like that, and we've discovered that they don't live in teepees. That kind of does some harm to the way people perceive Indians. They almost see them as sellouts, or they've been assimilated and they've lost something about their tribal past and their tribal cultures. So that is of great harm, but I do believe the why that they're misrepresented is because of that original association with the American Indian in terms of American national identity.